Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual preview crew of Brandon, Marion Lee, and Dan Schneier. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of probably watching Hairspray Live, I don't know, to join us on the podcast to preview Week 14. Before we get into that, though, Dan, we have some unfinished business, don't we?
We do.
Okay,
Yeah,
you want to tell the
do.
people at home what that
Yes.
business is?
Or if you were listening in on last week's podcast, me and Brandon had a bet that will be fulfilled after this podcast until 9, 10, or 10 p.m. tomorrow that Kirk Cousins would not finish as a top 12 quarterback in fantasy. Brandon had that he would. I had that he wouldn't. And I just want to say I lost the bet gracefully, but I'm gonna throw in a little excuse because if Kirk Cousins doesn't run for that stupid rushing touchdown from a yard out or whatever it was, he threw for 270, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and he's out of the top 12. But the chips fell as they did, and I need to eat my crow, and I was wrong. And I was also very wrong about Colin Kaepernick, who I said would outscore him, and then he got a snow game and he was benched.
Well,
so it was a bad week for quarterbacks for me.
Yeah, I also feel like when you say that, Dan, it reminds me of there was some story about Jeff Fisher recently about all the excuses he's had over the years and how he starts everyone with look, this isn't an excuse, but we only had 4 days, or hey, it's not an excuse, but we had 2 less players because of arrest or something like that. So I'm not saying you're Jeff Fisher. I'm just saying it reminded me of Jeff Fisher. So,
but I'm saying, is that a mustache you're growing?
No.
Ooh, hopefully. Well, look, you got to give Jeff Fisher credit there. That is a Pro Bowl level mustache.
Top level. Absolutely.
All right.
No, but I agree with you. It was a very, very weird week. And I was terrified. I thought this was not going to happen, by the way, because here's what's so crazy. And I wrote an article about the new low scoring that's happening around the National Football League. Only 4 quarterbacks scored over 20 fantasy points in standard scoring up until Monday last week. So then obviously Andrew Luck, But before that, the week before, 3 quarterbacks scored over 30 fantasy points and 15 scored over 20. So he would not have been a top 12 the week before. He would have been
You picked a horrible week for that bet, Dan.
That's really what it is. But I will take it graciously because some guy actually sent me a DM with a Ryan Tannehill with my Twitter handle on his forehead. And like, you could use this picture if you'd like. And I was like, oh no!
Wow!
I really agreed to this.
That was nice of that guy. That was really kind of him.
Yeah.
Wow,
nice. But
can we see that at some point? I kind of want to just see it. Anyway. You don't have to change it. I just
have to beat me at something though.
Okay, well, I'm sure there'll be something that pops up in this show that we can bet
I'm sure.
So, anyway, all right. Let's get to some news and notes, and then a little later we will get to your fantasy playoff questions, and then our usual DFS starts and sits. So first up. I don't know why we just like talking about depressing news, but let's just talk about the New York Jets for a second. Bryce Petty will be the quarterback this week and every week going forward. So, Dan, I guess we'll go. Actually, Brandon, you wrote the opus on the Bryce Petty situation here in our notes.
I did.
So, and we're not really worried about Bryce Petty, obviously, but it's more about what effect does this have on Forte, Brandon Marshall, etc.
Yeah, we don't really have anything that we can hang our hat on here in Pro Football Focus as to what Bryce Petty's like in the National Football League. So why even ask? But we do know that San Francisco gives up a league high average of 148.2 rushing yards to opposing running backs weekly. I mean, so if there's a silver lining here is that they're going to give the ball to Matt Forte a lot and he's going to run. Last week was very weird because they got down 14-0 right away, and everything just went downhill for the Jets last week. So I'm not going to, judge on that. Now, Forte is questionable, though, with a knee and foot injury, actually. Was limited in practice today. He should be fine, but do keep an eye on that. Maybe Bilal Powell gets involved. I'm not going to bank on that. To me, I feel like Forte's a solid play still this week because I don't think they're going to do a lot of passing, period. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting last week. I think Bilal Powell, if I remembered correctly, out-snapped Matt Forte, but Matt Forte vastly out-touched Bilal Powell. So, it wasn't even a case of more attention. I mean, Matt Forte was still the man there. So Dan, what do we do about, Brandon Marshall then in that receiving game? Because obviously, I guess we consider it a downgrade, or do we?
I mean, here are the things that you generally have when you generally find when somebody comes in like Bryce Petty, who obviously hasn't played that much football at the NFL level. I had a very low grade on him coming out of Baylor. Personally, I didn't think he'd ever be capable of playing at the NFL level, and nothing he showed me, even in garbage mop-up time against a basically cover 2 shell against the Colts last week, makes me feel otherwise. But I will say this: what you do see a lot of the times with young quarterbacks like that is they lock onto one target. Might be the tight end. It might be the dump offs with the running backs, and it might be one like main receiver like Marshall. I'm not in the game of guessing there. I do know that the 49ers give up the most total, are on the field for the most defensive snaps this season. They've also been on the field for the longest time possession. They're always on the field, this defense. So I know the volume will be there, but I'm kind of worried about him locking on to just kind of intermediate targets and then taking those deep shots with guys like Robbie Anderson and these no-name Jets receivers who are just frequenting their roster these days after they've kind of blown a lot of draft picks at the wide receiver position over the years. So I'm not big on Marshall, but I do think the volume's there to at least make him somebody who's worthy of that wide receiver 3 flex. You don't want to take him out of that for somebody who's maybe in a lower volume game, a slower game that we don't expect as many snaps and plays and points from. Because I do think this game will have a lot of points. I don't think the Jets will be able to stop Kaepernick. I back to that well, and I don't think that the 49ers have any chance of stopping the Jets offense. I'll talk a little bit more about Forte later because he's one of my favorite DFS plays, and I have a few more nuggets to add, and I'm sure Brandon has them as well. But as far as Marshall goes, I'm just not as confident there.
Yeah. All right, let's get to a little bit of late breaking news. So we have Justin Forsett, who was signed by Denver today, and apparently is immediately going to be thrown right into that fire. So, Brandon, we don't quite know yet what the split's going to be, but we do know Devontae Booker hasn't exactly been lighting the world on fire. So what do you expect to see from Booker and Forsett this week in the Broncos? And you've got Trevor Siemian, by the way, who's a little banged up too. So it has a recipe for disaster there.
Yeah, I go back and forth between thinking that maybe Emmanuel Sanders is like the best DFS play of the week and then wondering if I'm insane. It's like one of those weeks, right?
It's the cold medicine.
Yeah, it's also the cold medication. Yeah, I'm totally Kathleen turning out right now. I'm trying really hard not to do that, but sorry, everybody. My problem here is that throughout the whole season, Kubiak has yet to give the other guy, the like change up back more than 10 touches in a game.
Okay.
So if Forsett is new and he's not getting the 10 touches, I don't know what he's going to do. He's already been cut from 2 teams so far this year. Kubiak hasn't, they can get back, I guess, their Kubiak Forsett magic, maybe, but it's been a while. He's a different player, and Kubiak's a different coach. They're on a different team. I mean, I think it's a little overstated. I think that they want them to prepare for confusion, right? I think this is a mind game thing. So I'm just saying, from a touch perspective, they have yet to give the up and coming guy Bibbs, when it was Booker, when CJ Anderson was in, and what have you. They have yet to give that up and comer over 10 touches this season. I mean, it could start with Forsett, but I would be very surprised.
Dan, what about you? What do you see there?
Yeah, I think Brandon hit it right on the head. I mean, this is an offense with some similar principles to the one where Forsett played in with Kubiak, but it's not the same offense. It's a different offense. And we always harp on playing time, and we always say it comes back down to kind of pass protection schemes and different experience levels that these running backs have within the offense. And there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve, maybe not as high as if he came to like a Scott Linehan offense in Dallas or something like that. It's a completely different scheme, like more vertically attacking scheme. But at the same time, there's going to be some kind of just period where he's going to have to get back into the swing of things with his new team. And I don't think that's going to be this week. I think that as disappointing as Booker's been, and that's really been a surprise to me because I loved his college tape, and we our college football focus guys had a really, really strong grade on him. They compared him to Arian Foster, and he just hasn't shown that at the pro level. I don't know if the game's too fast for him. I don't know if he's playing through an injury because he was banged up a little bit earlier this year, and maybe it's just been one of those lingering injuries. But it doesn't seem like even if he struggles again, they're going to feel confident enough to go with Forsett with enough touches where you can say, in my fantasy playoffs, I'm going to roll out Forsett in my flex or my running back too, even in the most desperate of situations, because you have other guys where you can plug and play there. So I'm not ready to do it.
Well, and let me say this. I don't think either one is a good fantasy option at this point, especially for your playoff team. But for me, like, the reason I think Booker didn't sort of supplant CJ Anderson was CJ Anderson was clearly the better back, right? Like, CJ Anderson is clearly the best back on that team, but he's hurt. So now you got Booker stepping in. He's been the guy for the last month or so. Hasn't gotten above 4 yards a carry. They've had him on a 17 carry or more workload for the last 5 games and doesn't have 100 yards. He doesn't even have 80 yards at this point. So I only say that Forsett, to me, has an outside shot of sort of not outperforming necessarily, but definitely getting more snaps than I think that what you had mentioned, Brandon, because I think the gap is probably closer between Forsett and Booker than it was between like Bibbs and Booker or Booker and Anderson or anything like that,
I don't know. I mean, my other problem is, listen, their offensive line, only one player has a grade over 69 from Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, nice.
On the right side, in fact, Stevens has a 29.5 grade, one of the lowest in the entire National Football League. So, not good. Not good.
Well, that, and when you've got, whoever it is, Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch, it's not like defenses, I think, are necessarily afraid of those guys. So, they're going to be shifting their attention to the run game. So,
right.
Yeah,
so, I just think he's kind of set up to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's the way I should put it, is that, like, not only is he going to be second fiddle, but he has a terrible offensive line on a brand new team whose offense maybe doesn't even have a signal caller. We don't know what's going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in your championship right now, this is not the move to make. But if you're playing, if you're playing DFS, is Justin Forsett even available in DFS right now?
I'd have to look.
I'm going to have to look. I'm going to look while we're talking, but I don't know because he wasn't on a team, right?
Correct. He might not be. He's
not making any of my lineups regardless.
Yeah.
There we go.
GPP only, I guess.
Not even.
Even
Not
then,
even.
I don't know.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to be nice.
Okay. Again, it's the cold medicine.
Yeah.
All right, so one last question, and then we'll get to some fantasy playoff questions from the Twitterverse. So just real quick, because, obviously Zeke Elliott has been one of the best and most popular fantasy players this year. There's some talk, Dan, that, the Cowboys are essentially having to go on record with, no, we're not sitting him down the stretch. But look, if they win against the Giants this week, that clinches, I believe, the division, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it clinches the division. They're 1 game off from home field. So, it would be the smart thing to do, I would think, to not give him 20, 25 carries like they have been. But is that realistic? I mean, he's still a rookie. It's not like he's, Adrian Peterson and over 30.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at some of the history, the Dallas has been here before. You look at that 12-4 team. Are they 12-4 or 14-2? I can't remember completely. I think it was
they're 12-4.
Yeah, the 2014 team.
Yeah,
and that was when Murray was dealing with a hand injury, and he ended up playing in the playoffs. But he played limited snaps in that final game when they had kind of clinched. And I think it's going to be a similar scenario. I don't think there's too much motivation to play Elliott a full complement of snaps once they lock up that number 1 seed, and they're really close to it because Seattle has 3 losses and they have a tie. Detroit way behind with four losses. So, I mean, I think it's going to happen sooner than later. I don't think they're going to lose to the Giants. Now the Giants lost Jason Pierre-Paul, and I don't think they were going to probably lose anyway. But and once it happens, there's just so little incentive to play someone like Elliott. Maybe if it's a different position, if you ask me something like Dez or even Dak, you can kind of come up with some rationale for playing them. Look, they need more reps. They want to try out new schemes. They want to try out new plays and different things that they could maybe try to leverage and use in the playoffs. But for Ezekiel Elliott, I mean, it's pretty constant. It's pretty much the same running schemes that they use over and over. The Cowboys use a good mix of zone blocking and power schemes, but it's not like rocket science. It's like 5 different plays they rotate every single game. So Elliott doesn't really need too much more experience running behind this offensive line in this scheme anymore. So I just don't see the incentive to playing him. So I think maybe it'll be one of those things where he gets like the first 8 to 10 touches of a game towards the end once they lock up the bye, and then they kind of just lean on Morris. I don't know. Do you see it differently? Do you guys see it differently?
Brandon, I think your comment was you don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, I don't believe in anything anymore.
Oh, no.
2016, man. It started with Bowie.
It's almost over. It's almost over, though.
I know, right? It just like kept coming at me. I don't know. Maybe. I think they don't need to give him 20 plus carries a game. I think that starts now. I mean, they don't need to do it like that. Why would they? Why would they need to do that? Like, I think that this week they are going to run a lot because that is how, that would be the best game plan for them this week. I actually have Dak ranked a little bit lower because I think they're going to lean on Ezekiel Elliott. So I shouldn't say that. I take it back. But I just don't think, I guess, but I think he could still get 10 to 15 and that's still half of his workload. I mean, I think we're kind of over exaggerating is what I'm saying. I'm like, okay. I don't think he'll get as many touches, but he doesn't need to have 25 touches every game like he does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that's the question is, if you have him, you're still going to start him unless Dallas just completely benches him, from the get-go. Your hands are kind of tied on that. I mean, He's got a good chance to score, even if he, like you said, has 10 touches a game.
That's the issue. He doesn't need a lot of touches.
Yeah, he doesn't need it.
Play. But the issue is they're also not going to tell you before the game what their, what their plan is with Ezekiel Elliott, because it just doesn't make any sense to do that. So you're kind of left in a tough position. For me, I mean, like, I won't own him down the stretch in DFS. I know that, and I've been leaning heavily on him, and I've been trying to get either him or David Johnson in every one of my cash game lineups up until this point, and it's worked out pretty well. And I know a lot of other people have adopted that strategy, but I think it's not this week because they still haven't clinched the bye. But once they clinch that, once they have nothing to play for, it just doesn't make sense to me for them to kind of keep up with this workload. I mean, right now, Brandon's right. Like, he hasn't needed that many touches to be a productive fantasy player, somebody you don't mind starting in maybe a RB2 flex spot. But he has needed a lot of touches to be that locked-in RB1 top 5 play every week. And if those go away, I don't know if he can still maintain that level.
I mean, I think the good news is it's going to take a lot of breaks for them to clinch that bye before like week 16. Right. I mean, so worst case, I think, is championship week for a lot of fantasy leagues there is no incentive at that point, but even then they might still be going for it, so.
He's also a feisty guy. I mean, he's going to want to get in there when they're at the goal line. I mean, I think, he was very frustrated. I remember at the beginning of the season when Al was getting everything. Shut that down real quick. He went in there, was like, and I could see him kind of doing that again. Like, just, it's just, I mean, like Dan said, it just doesn't make it's just the risk, meaning why would you risk him tearing something or falling weird or, something like that.
If you own Ezekiel, you should be rooting against the Cowboys. It's as simple as that.
Right.
And for the Seahawks.
There you go. Okay. So that covers that. Let's jump right in before the break to some fantasy playoff questions. So we did send something out on Twitter a little earlier. Let's just do rapid fire, folks, and let's just try to get to as many of these as we can. First up, and either one I think this is appropriate for, Jameis Winston or Kirk Cousins. Who wants to take that one? And no, I didn't make that up. That's a legit question. So.
Brandon, you can start if it's a Cousins question. I think you should be able to state your case first.
I have them actually ranked right next to each other. So it is it's like the least fun answer that I've ever given. But and we have them ranked right next to each other in Pro Football Focus for our gold rankings. So actually, no, I don't. Wow. I need to adjust this.
Cold medicine.
I have Cousins way higher than Jameis Winston. So I brought Winston down.
Okay.
Sorry.
So you're taking Cousins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, and
right.
you might be surprised to hear it, for me at least, but I'm also going with Cousins. And last week I didn't like Cousins because of the matchup, but this week he faces a Philadelphia defense that was very smoke and mirrors. At the beginning of the season, they were really led by that pass rush, kind of unique. It was something opposing offensive lines hadn't seen for a while. It was that wide nine technique, but recently the pass rush hasn't been getting there, and that's been exposing those Eagles cornerbacks on an island. And right now, I'm not sure you can find 5 teams with a worse cornerback depth chart at 1, 2, and 3 with McKelvin and Carroll and whoever else they're trying to put back there than the Eagles. And as we know from past experience that Cousins has had a lot of success throwing against the Eagles earlier this season. He really hasn't found too much. I should say the opposite of success. He hasn't failed too much against any defenses because he does get those rushing touchdowns. But this is not a matchup where I think he will. I think at this point, from this point on, everyone's kind of going to beat up on this Eagles defense.
Yeah, and then it's actually a two-parter, Dan. So you can take the second part until Brandon comes back. Larry Fitzgerald or a banged-up Julio Jones this week, or a Jamison Crowder. And I feel like, I don't know. I mean, we don't know the extent, I think, of Julio's injury. I think it's Julio until we hear, like, hey, he's 50% or something less than that, right?
Yeah, nobody wants to see the turf toe thing. Like, that's just like, ugh, is he going to even be 100%? Is he going to be able to push off that toe? But I mean, like, you haven't seen those negative reports you usually see from a week where Julio either doesn't play or Julio is like has one of those no target limited weeks. And I'm just not going to be the one to tell you, even though I do like Crowder's matchup and I do like and I'm sorry, what was the other receiver?
Fitzgerald.
And Fitzgerald, I'm not as high on Fitzgerald. Miami's been playing a lot better on defense recently. But again, I like the Crowder matchup, but I'm just not going to be the guy to tell you to bench Julio Jones. Like, until we see some definitive proof that he's limited by this injury, you can't bench Jones for the playoffs.
Right. And I think that goes generally for studs, you know? I mean, because look, I'm with you. I mean, you don't want to overthink stuff, right? Like, you don't want to get cute with it. And guys like Julio Jones or, you know, even Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, it's like, ooh, do I start Rodgers or so-and-so? It's a little tough. Hey, Brandon, welcome back.
You know, just did a little break.
Okay. All right, well, then you can take the next one then. All right, so standard scoring, rest of season, running backs, Amir Abdullah, Justin Forsett, or Jacquizz Rodgers. None of these options are great, but
I actually don't hate Jacquizz Rodgers rest of season.
okay. So you think he'll get some more action even with Doug Martin around?
Yeah, you know, they're actually expressing their displeasure with Doug Martin. I mean, he's averaging, you know, less than 3 yards per carry. He's yet to go over, I think it was 3.6 yards per carry in a game this season. They have to get back to the running game, and they were running really well with Jacquizz Rodgers. So I actually think that if anyone has a chance to be productive on a consistent basis this season, it is Jacquizz Rodgers. And certainly he is the best handcuff, one of the best handcuffs in the league.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Another running back question. Dan, should I drop Rob Kelly for Dion Lewis in a PPR league for the playoffs?
Wow, that's a great question. So Dion Lewis is a guy that we've talked about a lot, not as much on this show, but on other shows. And he's one of my favorite guys just because he's really good at that elusive rating statistic that Pro Football Focus's features. And that's just kind of a way to tell how good a running back is independent of his blocking. And the Patriots have actually been much better blocking. But the issue this year than recently, but the issue with Lewis is just kind of the volume thing. Like, you don't really know where it's at. And yes, you have. So after this week, which is going to be tough against the Ravens in a night game, you have the Broncos the week after, who have been susceptible against the run, but not as much to passes to the running backs, I should say. And then the Jets, who are like the complete opposite. They have they have the speed of the slowest linebackers in the game. So you can always kind of hit those real routes and those passes of the running backs. So it's kind of one of those things where you wouldn't play in week 15, you would play in week 16. But if you're going to drop someone like Rob Kelly, who's just guaranteed volume, and he has matchup coming up against the Eagles, which is just a really easy matchup against this crumbling Eagles defense. It's just too much for me. It's too much risk. It's too much. You have just too high of a chance of hitting that floor, which is just a Dion Lewis 4-point game when he's just not involved. So for me, even in a PPR league, I take the guaranteed volume with Kelly.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that because even last week when you had James White and Dion Lewis both healthy, they literally had, I think, the same amount of touches. I think it was 7-9 to Lewis. So, you know, until definitively, like you said, Lewis is the passing down back there with no other obstacles in his way, like, yeah, I think you have to go with the guy that is going to get more attention. So, all right, let's go to our tight end expert, Brandon Marion-Lee. So, rest of season, Brandon, Greg Olsen, who is in a bit of a slump, or CJ FedEx out of Houston?
If it's a PPR league, full point.
I don't know. It wasn't specified.
Well, it's really important for CJ Fedorowicz because he is in the top 10 in terms of tight ends over the last 2 months as a PPR tight end, but not as a standard, because right now there are a lot of issues where basically if you don't score a touchdown, you're not a top 10 tight end. Like, you actually want somebody who's touchdown dependent. I did a big article this week about tight ends, and we are almost averaging a full point less per game for the top 10 tight ends in both standard and PPR from 2012.
I actually am referring to your article in my article coming out tomorrow. So
yeah, isn't that crazy? And a huge portion of those tight ends are gone now. They're not even in the league anymore, right? So that's part of it, right? We don't have the Rob Gronkowski is hurt right now, but then, Tony Gonzalez, we forget how many points that he was putting up there, right? Antonio Gates has been having all these injuries. Jordan Reed has all these injuries, so the problem is it's going in and out of what the process is. So that's okay. But the thing is that to get double-digit points, you kind of have to score a touchdown. So that's the problem with CJ Fedorowicz, unless it's in PPR settings. So he is getting more targets than everyone else. But I think I might just go Fedorowicz in general. I apologize, but
interesting.
Cam Newton is my problem with Greg Olsen.
Yeah.
I am shocked with how he's been playing lately. I am. For 3 games, he hasn't been able to complete even 50% of his passes, his pass attempts that are aimed, not even like throwaways, you guys. This is like aimed pass attempts. So I'm concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep it with the Panthers. Dan, Thomas Rawls or Jonathan Stewart for this week?
I mean, this Panthers offensive line right now is blocking so poorly recently, and I just can't get behind them establishing any kind of run game. Obviously, this week, it's really depressing. This whole Panthers team has been a complete disappointment. And obviously, this week they go against the Chargers defense. It's been much better this season since adding Joey Bosa to the mix. Now, the Chargers are definitely better at rushing the passer than they are defending the run, but I just can't get behind the Panthers to kind of go ahead and block going forward. And we saw what Rawls was capable of last week. He looked like kind of the 2015 version of himself, just kind of ripping off those big runs, a lot of bursts, a lot of explosion. The Packers' run defense have been a little bit better in recent weeks. I don't know if that has more to do with the fact that they're getting healthier a little bit or just because of the matchups, but I take Rawls here for sure over Stewart.
Okay. All right. Let's call this the last one. Brandon, feel free. The standard scoring, pick one of these 3 for my flex. Kelvin Benjamin, Sterling Shepard, or Todd Gurley. And I never thought those 3 would ever be a question, but here we are. So Gurley, Benjamin, Shepard. Flex. Go. Standard score.
Standard. I think I'd go Gurley.
Okay.
Sorry.
Why?
I'm afraid about Kelvin Benjamin with Cam Newton and his targets. I mean, this is obviously a better game against the Chargers, but not that much better. The Chargers come out and they do weird things, and they're traveling to Carolina, but certainly, this is not the kind of cushy matchup that you're looking for, a bounce back game for Cam Newton or the receivers whatsoever. And then, who's the other option? Hold on, I'm forgetting it.
Sterling Shepard.
Oh yeah, Shepard. The Cowboys defense also surprisingly better than you think. I mean, certainly the wide receiver is the better option than the running game as far as the matchup is concerned. I like Shepard, but he's touchdown dependent and like the way that I don't like. So and wide receivers, you don't necessarily need that. You need more volume, even though it's not a PPR league. So for me, I'm a little bit nervous. Although with JPP being out, I mean, certainly they're going to score a lot of points. But whenever you look at back at like what the Cowboys have defended against, they're quite good at stopping people from scoring points. I mean, I don't know what else to say. So I'm going to go with Todd Gurley because I love that stash. No. I just think that they're going to have to run.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, is that about right, Dan? With Sterling Shepard, you are our New York Giants expert here. I mean, obviously the concerns with Benjamin are legit because Cam Newton is struggling so mightily. But what about Shepard? Because he's been even more up and down than anyone on the Panthers, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I like Shepard a lot this week. I also like Gurley, so that would be a close one for me. But I think Shepard has really started to find a little bit more of a groove in this offense. It's kind of that number 2 option. He has 4 touchdowns in the last 5 games, which is ideal. 1 came in garbage time, but those count the same. And Cowboys cornerback Orlando Scandrick used to be probably one of the best top 5 cornerbacks in the NFL at defending the slot. But since his injury, since we're coming back from the injury, he hasn't been the same. He's been actually graded out really negatively so far, according to Pro Football Focus, in the slot. So, and he's actually on the injury report already this week. So I'm sure he'll play, but it's going to be an interesting, easy matchup there. And the Giants are going to have to pass this game. They're at home. They use more no huddle. So I think Shepard's a fine play, but I do really like Gurley for other reasons that I'll touch on in our DFS section.
Okay. Great segue, Dan. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get to those daily starts and sits. All right, everyone, welcome back. All right, let's go in order. Let's touch on quarterbacks first. And Brandon, you're up.
Me? Good.
Yeah,
actually, can we go to Dan? I'm sorry.
Okay, Dan, because I think actually Dan had the same player anyway. So.
Oh, did it? Well, so this is so funny. I got my computer decided to freeze, but it bumped me off my notes, so I'm opening them. I wrote like an ode to you guys, basically. Like I made a lot of notes, so I was like, I want to have my notes. So anyway, go ahead.
All right,
yeah, I'll hop in. Unfortunately, it's the same player as Brandon, but I love Andy Dalton this week. So I think that people, he hasn't inspired too much confidence in his fantasy owners ever since AJ Green tore his hamstring, but he's still getting it done in the right matchups. Over the past 6 weeks, Dalton has scored over 20 fantasy points in 3 of his 6 games. That doesn't seem like a great ratio, but the 3 games he struggled in were the Ravens, Giants, and Bills, all 3 tough defenses. 3 games he scored over 20 was the Eagles, Redskins, and Browns. And guess who he gets again this week? The Browns. So we're talking about a team that has their 26th best pass rush grade overall, or 26th best cumulative pass coverage grade. Browns don't do anything well on defense. The only name you'll even recognize anymore is Joe Hayden, and he's no longer the same. And Dalton's really needed to lean more frequently on Tyler Eifert as his number 1 option. He's his most talented player left on the field without Green. And that's great news because the Browns give up the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So that shouldn't be a difficult matchup either. It's just too easy for Dalton here. He scored over 20 points last time against the Browns, and it's going to happen again. Love Dalton this week.
Okay. Well, then,
he's
Brandon,
so cheap.
So cheap.
He's like the 15th highest priced player, and he's going up against the Browns. All but 3 quarterbacks that have faced the Browns have thrown for over 300 yards and or thrown 3 touchdowns. Like, come on now. What else do I need to say? It's over.
Even Ryan Tannehill beat up on the Browns. I know we say it every week, but we have to.
We have to.
All right, Brandon. Man. Well, then tell us who is too expensive in daily this week at quarterback.
Yeah, so for me, I didn't do necessarily like sit because, I think they are terrible, but I was just like, this is too much. Like, listen, Jameis Winston's not a deal. Yeah. Too bad, you guys. He's a 5th highest priced quarterback on FanDuel, 7th highest on DraftKings. And listen, I'm just being honest with you. Only 4 of the 12 quarterbacks that have faced the Saints have scored over 20 fantasy points.
There you go.
And I'm not saying that it can't be Jameis, but I'm not going to put my money on it, literally. And I just think that, only the surprising Jared Goff was able to score 3 touchdowns on the Saints. Everyone else scored 2 or less. And Jameis Winston, when he has those big 20-point games, of which he's had many, but he's always thrown for at least 3 touchdowns in all of those games. So he's touchdown heavy for his like big fantasy point scoring. Now he could get the 300-yard bonus. So on DraftKings, it's a little more palatable for me. And certainly on Yahoo, where he's only the 13th highest priced guy, fine. But I think that sometimes when you look at like what the actual fantasy production has been, it just doesn't read to me of like definitely have to play. But hey, we definitely had to play Drew Brees last week at home against the Lions. So, I mean, listen, anything can happen, but statistically speaking, I just cannot support this.
Yeah. And Dan, you had mentioned Mariota as a guy that might be a little too expensive for people, right?
It's not even a price thing with Mariota because he's kind of priced in that middle range of quarterbacks in that 10 to 15 range on the various sites. But it's more of just a matchup thing. I think Mariota, people are hanging their hats on the fact that he's been so consistent for their fantasy teams this year. But that's just going to change because this is the Denver Broncos defense. They've really found their stride now. They have Aqib Talib back in the lineup, and he's dominant. He's going to shut down Rashard Matthews, who's been basically the Titans' only source of production in the passing game recently. And Delaney Walker, you got to worry about a little bit too, obviously, anytime. But again, I think they can kind of key in there. And you can kind of move the ball surprisingly on the Broncos this season on the ground. That's the one thing that hasn't carried over from last year after they lost Malik Jackson, Jarrell Freeman, guys like that. Their run defense has not been as dominant as it was. They've still been amazing with the pass rush, still been amazing in pass coverage. Not the same against the run. So I think this will be kind of like a ground and pound game for the Titans. Try to kind of keep it a 1 or 2 possession game. I just think Mariota is going to be low volume, might not even score more than a single, might not even throw for more than a touchdown. And I hate him this week. In no lineups would I play him, DFS or regular season.
Okay. All right, let's go on to running backs. Brandon, who do you got on your start side this week?
Well, I think that if you're looking for a cheap value play, if he plays, Ryan Matthews is still the touchdown guy for Philadelphia. He got hurt in Seattle in week 11. He hasn't seen the field since, but he is at practice. The week prior to his injury, he rushed for over 100 yards and scored 2 rushing touchdowns. This week, I mean, we don't know for sure, and this is a Wednesday show, so clearly if he's on the injury report and he's not playing, obviously this doesn't work. But he is priced at $4,600 on FanDuel and $4,000 on DraftKings. It's incredibly cheap. And the thing is that Washington's given up 14 rushing touchdowns so far this season, the second most in the league. So keep your head on a swivel, but I think you could do a lot worse for your value play this week.
Yeah, and look, Ryan Matthews, banged up, but still the same Ryan Matthews. He's got a 4.2 yards per carry. That's pretty much in line with what he usually does. There's no drop-off on his performance. It's just the usual, 3 to 4 games that he misses due to injury every year. But if he's past that, then, hey, it's good times then. So, Dan, who are your value plays at running back this week?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and I think in no way or shape or form am I trying to brag here because I get tons of these wrong. But last week I did highlight Jordan Howard on the show, who obviously had a big breakout week, and he finds himself in a similar situation. A running back this week finds himself in an almost identical situation to Howard. Matt Forte is priced almost the exact same spot as Howard was last week, and that's in that top 10 DFS running back price tag, and an area where people don't want to invest because they see Matt Forte and they don't think he's worth it, and they're targeting guys like David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell in a tier above price range, or they're trying to save money in a tier below. And so because of this, you can get a low percentage ownership on a guy like Forte this week. He's in the same situation. It's against the 49ers, a run defense that Brandon touched on before, but I'll just add a few other things. They have the 29th best cumulative run defense ranking according to Pro Football Focus, most yards per game, most yards per carry in the NFL, and most importantly, they've allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. In addition to what I mentioned before with the volume, 49ers defense on the field for the most snaps this season, longest time. And last week, obviously, it was a weird situation. Forte only finished with 79 total yards, but he did it on just 12 touches because the Colts jumped out to that huge 3-score lead. The Jets finished with just 52 offensive plays. Forte was out for most of the second half. He only had 24 total snaps even and 12 touches on those. So I think that's going to change. The Jets are going to have a lot more plays. He's going to be in for a lot more snaps, and he's going against a really bad defense. So I love Forte. And then Gurley, who actually Brandon mentioned, I really like Gurley this week. I think if you've gotten this far, you've probably come so close to reaching your breaking point with Gurley, where you're like, I can't even believe you're suggesting I start him in the fantasy playoffs or in DFS, even though he's priced so low now. But go back to that well one more time, because he was never going to get it going against the Patriots. That's our second best run defense. But the Falcons, they've allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs this season. The NFL is a copycat league. They try to run the defensive scheme that we see the Seahawks run, but they just don't really have the players to make it work. So the result is our 25th best cumulative run defense. They have a defense that allows a lot of passes underneath, just the way they play. They play a 3-high safety look that tries to keep everything underneath. So to me, there's going to be a lot of checkdowns for Gurley. He's going to have a good matchup every time he runs the football. I think he's going to go finally over 100 yards and hopefully gets that touchdown.
Well, yeah, and I think the big lesson there is if he can't get it going against Atlanta, like we're done. Like, true. I mean, look, it's end of season anyway, but truly, there's no hope. I mean, for the
Yes.
rest of the season of the fantasy playoffs, I think we're all done here.
But don't
So-
mention me that he's Trent Richardson, okay?
Oh, do you get that a lot?
Yeah,
yeah.
someone did. They were like,
Oh,
"Oh yeah, is he the new Trent Richardson?" And I was like, "That's just mean.
Oof. I mean,
You can't bring me down like that because
I
that
will-
depresses me."
I will give you guys a preview. I did say to sell him in my Dynasty stock article. But again, that's just a teaser for tomorrow. You have to read it tomorrow. to
Yeah,
find
you
out
have to
the
read
rest
his
of it.
article tomorrow. Everything's
there you
free, guys. Go over there.
There you go.
Well, I
Okay.
agree with that. You could sell him, but he's not Trent Richardson. I mean, come on now.
That's worse. All right. So, Braden, running backs that are not a good value this week.
Oh gosh. Okay, so I have been kind of tinkering around. I'm sorry, David Johnson at $99,700, and I'm clutching my pearls at $9,800 on DraftKings. I'm like, what? It's really hard to make a lineup with them, and he's completely worth it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just wondering if you guys have tinkered around and been able to create a lineup that you actually enjoyed with him and other players that you thought would get points. I mean, it's gotten a little dicey.
No, I'm
Hard.
with you. Yeah, they're really pricing the players much better in DFS over the final stretch of the season, and it makes it really hard to have a guy like Johnson in your lineup.
And the next person down on both of them is Bell at 9,000. You can save $700 or $800 just going down to Bell. So I can't justify it.
And this
So
has such a I'm with you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm saying
no,
it's kind of
please. You're
a
going to
larger statement about fantasy this season because we went into the year saying this was the year where all the studies, all the stats say you go wide receiver, round 1, round 2 in a snake. You invest high at wide receiver. The wide receivers are safe. Don't go running backs. And that was reflected early on in daily fantasy pricing. Those top receivers were all in that 9,000 range, and you could just lock in on guys like DJ, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott, in kind of that 7,500 range, even earlier at like 7,000. And now finally they're flipping at the end of the season. These guys are still healthy. The trend was clearly more of an outlier, or just maybe this is the outlier of the season. But all I know is it's completely flipped from wide receiver to running back, and it's really interesting to look at as far as the pricing goes.
Yeah. Well, running backs, Dan, who are you looking at to sit this week?
I don't want LeGarrette Blount this week, and I know he's been one of the fantasy's most consistent running backs, something no one really expected going into the year. I mean, I got him in one fantasy football auction for like $2 at the end of an auction. It was like, LeGarrette Blount, you're really going to invest in this guy? You can't predict it. But again, this one's just so simple. I don't want to do too much on this because it's so obvious. The Ravens have the single best run defense in the NFL this year. They are the Jets of 2015. No one runs on this defense. They're way ahead of everyone else in our metrics as far as run defense goes. They don't give up anything to anyone, and it's not going to happen this week with LeGarrette Blount. I don't care how well the Patriots have blocked, and they really have. You got Cannon in the middle at guard who's just playing out of nowhere at an all-pro level because they just happen to find another guard in whatever round they found him in, middle rounds. But point is, the Patriots offensive line has blocked better. There's no doubt, but nobody's going to run on this this Ravens run defense, in my opinion, for the rest of the season.
Well, and more on that point, because, before when you had Deion Lewis hurt, there'd be games where LeGarrette Blount was the only Patriots running back to tally a carry. Like a couple games. No one else ran the ball for New England. But like last week, you had him with 18 carries, and then between Lewis and White, they had 8 between the two of them. So it's an 18-8 split, effectively. So it's not like he's the true – I mean, look, he's still the lead back. He's still going to get the goal line carries, obviously. But it's not like he's going to get 30 carries there and no one else is. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, you've got the Ravens defense, which has just been very good. Against
they're a matchup team. They don't want to go. They don't. And I did say Cannon before. I meant Shaq Mason, even though Cannon's also having a good year for them on that right side, right tackle. And they're just not the type of team that's going to line up and say, "Oh, okay, your strength is stopping the run. We're going to just run right at you." They're the type of team that's going to try to play their advantage. So I just don't see it happening with Blount.
Right. All right, let's move on to receivers, Brandon. Who do you got that you're playing this week?
Yeah, I hate to focus a little too much on the Monday night game just because of DFS purposes, but at the same time, because of LeGarrette Blount, actually, it's a good segue into I think Malcolm Mitchell is legitimately going to continue getting touches. So he's going to continue to get targets. Rob Gronkowski's off the season. They can't run on the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to have to throw. And I think that Malcolm Mitchell's developed kind of a nice little rapport with him. And especially if you look at his DraftKings pricing, $4,200 on DraftKings, which is incredibly cheap for a guy who has definitely exploded on the scene over the last 3 weeks. So, listen, for 3 weeks, 12 total targets, 322 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, Baltimore's given up 18 receiving touchdowns to opposing wideouts, which is tied with Green Bay for the second most in the league. So it just is a great matchup for him.
Yeah. Is there any risk, let me ask you this then, on that sort of being the chalk play at the end of the day? With Mitchell, I mean, meaning because his low price and because he's sort of been the new shiny toy the last couple of weeks, is there any, does that go into your thinking at all, I guess, when you're building a lineup?
It would traditionally, but because it's a Monday night game, it's not on the main slate, so you'd have to be playing in one of the funkier slates. It may be popular, but I also feel like it's so cheap, especially on DraftKings, that I'm not quite sure I'm comfortable fading him just based off of ownership percentage.
Right. Dan, what about you? Receivers you're playing this week?
I mean, I touched earlier on Sterling Shepard, who I liked. Again, that's a matchup thing with Orlando Scandrick. I really like Emmanuel Sanders. Brandon actually mentioned him earlier. Didn't really go into too much detail, but he's got a great matchup that you should really take advantage of, and he could see a lot of volume too. And then I'm not going to fall for the trap of Jeremy Maclin, even though it seems like a good matchup against Oakland. Just look at the fact that he's just coming back off injury and the fact that he really struggled in that first matchup with Oakland. And then a guy I kind of like for tournaments, which is going to be interesting, is Deshaun Jackson. Not just the fact that it's narrative street against the Eagles. I just think that they're going to really light it up against the Eagles. I talked about that earlier, why I like Cousins so much. And Jackson just seems like a really good tournament play, one of those guys who can really hit. And he's only 5,800 on FanDuel. So, I mean, he just seems like a really good play to me. So those are kind of the guys I'm looking at.
And what about the guys you're benching this week on DFS?
Yeah, I really don't want any part of Devontae Parker this week. The same goes for Ryan Tannehill, but I know Parker's been consistent as far as the box scores go over the last few weeks. But again, I talked about this last week, and I talk about this every week. I avoid the Cardinals defense. I think they're just a step below that elite level, and I think they're going to have Tannehill's going to have a really, really tough time against them. And if he sees any snaps against Peterson, I'm sure he will, because I doubt Peterson kind of follows around Landry the entire game in the slot. So if he sees any snaps against Peterson, that's an auto loss for him. And then I also hate Rashard Matthews. Rashard Matthews has been unbelievably consistent in fantasy over the past 4 or 5 weeks. If he hasn't scored a touchdown, which he has in 4 of his last 5, he's gone over 100 yards. He follows me on Snapchat. Yeah, I mean, he's been the man for fantasy.
Wait, hold on, stop. What?
Yeah.
Really?
I interviewed him last weekend.
Oh,
it was
nice.
amazing. He's like a really nice, respectful guy. Like he was raised in like a military family. He's really cool. And then I don't even remember how social media came up, but I think it was because I was, saying, follow him on Twitter @_R Matthews and on, Instagram at Rashard Matthews. And then somehow Snapchat came out. I was like, well, I'm on Snapchat. And then I looked at it was like Rashard Matthews started following you. And I was like, eee!
Wait, so can you say your Snapchat on here? Or do you want to wait till after we get done recording?
No, sure. It's fine. It's Brandon Marianne. It's
follow it right
public.
now.
Yeah, follow it. Yeah.
I'm doing it right now. Okay.
All right.
Anyway, sorry. I'm sorry, Dan.
Sorry. Rashard Matthews Snapchat.
Not a good play this
moving
week.
Moving on.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's going to get Aqib Talib on the outside. He might get Chris Harris if he moves into the slot, but they'll probably have Kendall right there for the most part. It's just not a good look for him. And I think, like I said earlier, Mariota, it's going to be a ground and pound game there. So those are the 2 guys I'm avoiding.
Okay. Let's move on to tight ends. Brandon's expertise. Who are you starting and sitting this week, Brandon?
Well, I love both Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry. I think there's a possibility they both score a touchdown against the Carolina Panthers, who have given up the most touchdowns this year to tight ends, tied with Detroit and Cleveland. So as I said, being a touchdown dependent is a good thing this year based off of the drought that we're seeing at tight end production. And also in weeks 8 and 10, they both scored a touchdown. I think that could possibly happen again. So they've kind of both gone in and out of being injured. So that was one of the rotating things that was going on there. Always keep your eye on the injury report with those guys. But honestly, they're both good end zone targets. Antonio Gates is really close to that record. And, I've been talking to a lot of people that cover the Chargers, and they're like, Hunter Henry's our best pass catcher, period. The best receiver on the team. So they're not going to shy away from him. They're very into this 2 tight end set. They're not intimidated by it. There are no problems. So, I really, really like it. Both of them. I
would love to see what the prop bet would be like in Vegas for both of them scoring a touchdown. It's got to be at least 3 or 4 to 1, That'd be a good bet to take.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, Phillip Rivers loves to throw the ball, but he also throws a ton of interceptions. Remember me saying that last week about Tampa Bay too? And it was exactly what happened. I was like, that's his game. He's going to throw all over the place, but he's going to throw them right into the defenders. And that's fine. As long as some of them make them to the end zone, those guys will get fed.
All right, Dan, what about you? Tight ends that you're starting and sitting this week?
Here comes something that you probably will never hear from me, and you've never heard in my 4 years of writing. You've never read in my 4 years of writing fantasy football articles. I am going to suggest playing Jason Witten. It's disgusting to even suggest
you can't do it.
He's, in my
Somebody
opinion,
needs to stop him.
The grossest fantasy football player out there. He can't do a single thing after the catch. There's literally I don't think he can even he's running at such a slow speed now, but the NFL's a copycat league. And 2 weeks ago, Zach Miller destroyed the Giants, and then Landon Collins, they're all basically borderline this year. He will be all pro safety, said, oh, the NFL's a copycat league. They saw we were getting exposed against the tight end, Zach Ertz and Tyler Eifert, and they just did the same thing. But then it keeps happening because Ladarius Green just destroyed them last week. Nothing has changed. They're copying it, and they're copying it again, and it's working, and it's working. And Jason Witten had 8 receptions the first game where the Giants played the Cowboys. It was the same exact thing. They can't stop the tight ends. Witten terrorized them last year. He scored the game-winning touchdown the first game of the 2015 season. He always seems to burn the Giants. It's a little bit of a narrow street, but mostly a matchup play here. Giants simply can't cover the tight end, and I think Witten's going to get going. And then as far as who I'm benching, get me off of the point. I hate points chasing. You know that. I talk about it every week. I'm not going to chase these Dwayne Allen points, okay? I'm sorry. I don't want them. And people are going to chase them because people are going to go all in on him. I get it. He scored 3 touchdowns. You're looking at the box scores. But Houston has been one of the best teams in the NFL all season at stopping tight ends. They allow the 4th fewest points to any tight end. And it's going to happen again this week. Allen will be nothing, and people will be like, what the hell? Why the hell did I play this guy in DFS and he had 5 points? Why the hell did I pick him up and spend my free agent budget on him? And he had a horrible week for my playoffs. And I'm just helping you. I'm going to say don't do that. You can get Hunter Henry, like Brandon said, Antonio Gates, and Jason Witten. These guys are either really cheaply priced in DFS or just maybe on your free agent waiver wire. Ladarius Green, that's a guy who's on your waiver wire. I'd play him over Dwayne Allen. So, again, those are my 2 plays for tight ends.
Well, and another note on the Jason Witten played in. He did have 14 targets in week 1 against the Giants.
14.
And like you said, he caught 9 balls, 66 yards. Can't do anything after the catch. But look, he was a favorite in week 1, and he caught a lot of balls that week. So. Yeah, I don't think anyone's really I think they feel dirty probably picking him in DFS, but look,
tight end's a weak position. I mean, don't sweat someone who can get you 9 and 66. Come on, man. In a PPR league, DraftKings, that's a lot of points.
Yeah.
For tight end, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's the new age tight end.
All right. Well, that will do it for this episode of the Fantasy Slant. Good luck to everyone in their fantasy playoffs. For Brandon, Marion Lee, and Dan Schneier, we will see you next time.